Hi, I'm Tony Northrup, and for my Lightroom video training series, I'm going to cover what's new in Lightroom 6 and Lightroom CC. So if you're already a Lightroom 5 expert and you're upgrading and you just want to know the stuff that's new, that's what this is for. Probably the biggest feature is face recognition, so let's take a quick look at that. If you normally tag portraits of people, face recognition can make that process much faster. So I have just some family pictures here. I can jump into the people view by clicking this button or clicking O. And you can see this has two separate sections, named people and unnamed people. What Lightroom has done is it's gone through and looked at every picture that I've selected and found all the faces and drawn little boxes around them. So these are all the faces. Now, the first time you open it up, it's going to prompt you to turn on indexing because when you've upgraded, it won't have indexed all the faces. You can do that by just clicking the identity plate up here, and then under face detection, just unpause it, click play. And it will start going through all of your pictures and finding the faces. It's already indexed these pictures. So we'll jump back into the people view. The first time you use it, there'll be no people in named people. You'll have to go through and manually add some. So the way you'll do that is it will group pictures together. Like there's two pictures in this group of the same person. I can click that and control-click other pictures of the same person, and then very easily tag the name by, there's another picture of her. So I'll click that and then just type her name. And now she has her own setting up here in the named people category. Find some pictures of Chelsea in here. When you double click on somebody, you'll see all the pictures that you've tagged of that person. You can double click it to go in and change something. For example, to remove a tag by clicking the X here, or to type a different name if it's named something incorrectly. Jump back to the people view. You also see that it starts suggesting pictures. It starts taking guesses at names, and it's often wrong. But in those cases where it's right, you could click the check mark here to approve that guess. Now, as we go back to the main people category, you can see it's looked at faces and it's going through and taking lots of guesses, and some of these are wrong. This one happens to be right, so I'll click the check mark there. I'll click the check mark there. So you could either type the correct name, or if it's simply not a face, I bet some of these are not faces. Let me see. Okay, this is not a face. Just click the X and it will remove that unidentified face, because sometimes it will just guess incorrectly. Overall, facial recognition, a useful tool, better than nothing, but it's probably not as accurate as you might have dreamed. I find that it identifies about 3 out of 4 faces as being faces. So 1 out of 4 faces won't be identified as a face, and you'll have to go through manually and draw a box around the face and then write the name. As far as actually guessing, identifying the proper face, it's probably about 20%. So you do a lot of just manually naming faces, but it's still nice that it has it in there. It's faster than the manually adding keywords. Performance improvements are new too. They've done several things to speed up the performance, the biggest of which is some GPU offloading. So here's how you can tell if you have GPU offloading. Go to the Edit menu or the Lightroom menu on a Mac and select Preferences. And then in the Preferences dialog, go to the Performance tab here. This checkbox should be selected, Use Graphics Processor, and then it will list the video card, the adapter that you have. This graphics processor is extremely good at doing simple mathematical stuff. It's better than your computer's processor. So Lightroom can say, hey, make this picture 2 stops brighter, and your graphics card will take it and then send it back to the computer. Now, if you don't want to use the GPU processing, you can uncheck that. If it does not say your graphics card name, if it shows an error message there, that means your computer is probably not compatible with the GPU offloading. What you need to do is to update your drivers. That still might not solve it, in which case you probably just won't be able to use it unless you were to either add a new video adapter or upgrade your entire computer. I have found, and Adobe has acknowledged this, it only improves the performance while adjusting sliders interactively in the Develop module. So things like adjusting the exposure up or down here are improved. If you use the adjustment brush and start making lots of adjustments or lots of cloning and healing, that's where you'll start to appreciate the difference. Because I don't think anybody ever complained about the adjustment sliders being slow, but once you add, a dozen different layers, things can start to bog down and will make it a little bit faster. But really, the performance improvements are fairly minor. There are a couple of other things that they've done. When you import photos now, and once you actually select a memory card and start to import them, if you convert the files to DNG, if you use the copy as DNG option here, which I do, it does it a little bit differently. In Lightroom 5 and earlier versions, it would read the picture from the disk, convert it to a DNG, and then save that picture to your computer. Now what it does is it reads it from your memory card and saves the raw file to your computer without converting it to the DNG. Then it opens up a background task to reread those files from your computer's disk, convert them to DNG, and replace that raw file. So it's actually added a separate step to the import process. And that means that the entire import process actually takes longer. But it's kind of a performance improvement because you don't have to wait for the DNG conversion before you can start editing your photos. So you can start editing those raw photos right away, and then when it converts them to DNG, it's going to copy over all of your settings. So you get access to your pictures a little bit faster, basically. There are also some general improvements on a Mac. Photos are just imported a little bit faster. They used to be faster to actually copy the pictures from your memory card to your local disk and then import them from there. They've made it so it's now about a tie. It's about the same. And they've made some other just kind of minor performance improvements, but I don't think anybody's going to be blown away. Most of the places where Lightroom was slow, it's still really pretty slow. They've added the HDR feature, which allows you to blend multiple pictures taken at different exposures into a single picture. So I have an example that I've already blended here. Here are 3 pictures bracketed, just to kind of show you what that is. This is a properly exposed picture, an underexposed picture, and an overexposed picture. You can select those 3 pictures, go to Photo Merge, and then select HDR. Well, HDR can be a little flaky, and what you see here is an error message telling me that I could not blend those 3 exposures for some reason. Now, in order to blend them, they need to be taken with the same camera, they need to be at different exposures, and they all either need to be JPEG or RAW. You can't mix JPEG and RAW files. Let's try this other bracketed shot here and see if this works better. As you can see, this is not like Photomatix Pro or other HDR software. It doesn't do complex tone mapping. It will, however, create a new DNG file for you, a raw file basically, that has, it's 16 bits of depth, if that means anything to you. It has all the detail from the shadows in your brightest pictures and all the highlights from your darkest pictures, all combined nice and smoothly. Your only options are auto align, which you want to leave selected if you handheld the pictures, and auto tone. Auto tone simply maps the exposure, highlights, and shadows sliders, but whether you leave auto tone on or not, you can easily make those changes later. Deghosting tries to map any movement, because here it took 3 exposures and people moved in between the exposures. So if we select deghosting high and then check the show deghost overlay checkbox, it's going to show me where it detected movement between the 3 pictures, and deghosting will go through and just try to eliminate that movement. So basically we'll pull from a single exposure to prevent people from kind of half appearing, what they call ghosting. So let's go back to none and then click merge. And when you create HDRs or panoramas, it creates a background task that runs. So when you want to try to find your image, if you've lost it, this is the final blended image, and you can see it has more detail. These highlights aren't blown out, but all the detail in the shadows and the sky is still there. That's the benefit of HDR. If you lose it later, go to text here and then just search for -HDR, and that will show you all your blended HDR photos. So HDR, it's not the artistic kind of HDR that you've come to know. It's a very practical way to extend the dynamic range of your camera, allowing you to capture clean shadows and a wider dynamic range between shadows and highlights than were otherwise possible. Check out the photo merge chapter in the Lightroom book for detailed information. Panoramas work very similarly, and in fact, they're under the same menu. With a panorama, close that filter there, you can blend multiple pictures taken of the same scene. And for example, this is a panorama of a building here. You can see I was taking pictures from left to right of this palace, and Lightroom has the ability to blend all of those into a single picture. It can be kind of slow, however. Here is a panorama I've already blended. This is Tivoli Gardens, and it took those 3 pictures and blended them into this one picture. So this one picture is a higher megapixel picture, and it's also a wider angle than I could have taken with the camera that I had on me at the time, which is why I took that panorama. Panoramas can be up to 512 megapixels. So you cannot make that gigapixel image using HDR, but 512 megapixels is probably enough for most people. Adobe's made a small adjustment to the way graduated and radial filters work in Lightroom. You now have the ability to mask out parts of the adjustment or to add in other parts. So let's take a look at this panorama here. And one of the challenges with this picture is that the sky is so bright. And as a landscape photographer, you learn to use these graduated filters well. So I'll turn on a graduated filter and just drag from the top down, and that will allow me to apply an adjustment to the sky that smoothly blends into the foreground here. So I'll just drop the exposure. There we go. So what I can do now in the newest version of Lightroom is to, with that selected, I'll switch over to a brush here. See this brush link? So I select that, and now either I could go in and add more to it. You can see as I'm painting in, it's dropping the exposure of the parts of the picture that I'm painting over. I'll hit Control Z to undo that. I can also hold down the Alt key and remove parts of it. So I'm making my brush a little bigger. In this case, I would not want that to apply to the castle in the foreground, that graduated filter. So I'm holding down the Alt key and painting out the castle. In fact, I'll turn on the auto mask here and make it a little more accurate. Let's feather this a little bit. So now instead of the graduated filter just being a line, I'm relying on the auto masking to just paint it a little more perfectly. So this actually allows me to make a more natural looking image. Now if I drop the exposure all the way, you can see that it's not quite perfect, but it is a little better. It's a little more accurate than it would have been otherwise. Anyway, it's nice to have that we can now do that with either graduated filters or with the radial brushes. They've made a couple of minor improvements to the video slideshows feature. It wasn't the most popular part of Lightroom, but the slideshow module over here does allow you to take multiple pictures and stitch them together into a slideshow. The changes are a couple. So let's jump into the slideshow, and I'll select some different pictures that aren't so big. Under the playback option here, you have a couple of new options. You have the sync slides to music option, which when you select music will cause Lightroom to choose transitions, to time transitions on the beats of your music. Basically, it just makes a more natural slideshow. It's what you would expect naturally. So if you have music selected, sync slides to music is something you'll pretty much always want to leave on. You also have the pan and zoom feature here, which is also known as the Ken Burns effect. So let's turn this way up and then click the preview button here. Okay, so here it's zooming out real nicely and it's zooming in really nicely. So that's the pan and zoom effect, and you didn't have that before. Before it was all just very static. This is kind of a standard feature that we've come to expect in slideshows, and so it's nice that Lightroom now has it in there. Let's go ahead and stop that preview. Finally, you can import photos directly into a collection. Really simple feature, but let's go ahead and open up the import dialog here. And when you do an import now, you have this checkbox right here, add to collection. So you select that, and then you can browse through, and well, this computer doesn't have any collections on it, but I can also make a new collection here, and we'll call it Chelsea. Click create. And so now when I import pictures, they'll automatically be added to that collection. Really nice feature to have. You can also make half adjustments in the library module. So the quick develop module in the library module is just a useful way to make quick adjustments. You can drop the exposure by a stop or raise it by a stop. These inner buttons by default change the exposure or the contrast or the highlights or the shadows by 1/3 of a stop. So if I want to do 1/3 of a stop there, I can do it, or I can undo it. If I hold down the shift key, it will do it by half of a stop. So see how those little buttons change? You can just kind of see little button changes. Rather, it's not half of a stop, it's half of the normal adjustment. So I just dropped it, I held down the shift key and clicked that. It would normally be 1/3 of a stop, but you can see as I look at the exposure slider here, it's 0.17 of a stop, which is 1/6, 1/2 of 1/3. Okay, so to make a long story short, hold down the shift key and use these inner buttons to make smaller incremental changes at 1/2 of the normal standard setting. You cannot do 1/2 of these larger stop things here. They'll always be one stop. Compressed backup catalogs. You know, when you go to exit Lightroom and it's like, do you want to back this up? And you say, skip until next week. Well, if you actually let it back it up sometime, it will make a copy of your backup catalog. And normally that backup catalog is the exact same size as your original catalog, which for me is about 2 gigabytes. So I think it keeps 10 copies of it. So now I have 100 copies or 100 gigabytes of my disk space taken up by these backup catalogs. Finally, Lightroom will just compress it in a zip file. It's a lossless compression. You don't lose anything. But I find that they're about 80% smaller. So instead of it being 2 gigabytes, it's about 400 megabytes. So it takes up much less space. It's a good thing. It's on automatically. You can't even turn it off. If you do decide that you want to restore backup, you'll have to unzip it first. But that's as easy as right-clicking the catalog file or just even double-clicking it. Another option here is Shift double-click, which is in the Develop module this works in. So let's pull up one of these pictures. This picture you can see is a little bit overexposed. If I hold down the Shift key and double-click blacks, it will make an adjustment for me automatically. So it basically just adjusted the overall, the black level to be pleasing so that there's some blacks were clipped. You can see it decided to clip just a few of the blacks up here. You can do the same thing for the whites. This picture is a little overexposed, so it's not adjusting the whites for me. You can also do it for exposure, and it will just automatically adjust it. So these are, when you shift and double click one of those settings, you're telling Lightroom, hey, just take a guess. Do what you think is good. A very minor change, and not something I was even able to recreate, but I know if you tether your computer, which we often do in the studio, now Lightroom can talk to the camera and warn you from the computer if the camera is running out of batteries or the memory card is filling up. You won't see any difference unless you have those problem conditions in there. But it's a little smarter about talking to cameras now. You can also automatically generate previews that are the size of your monitor. So before, Lightroom would just kind of always make previews that were like 1024 pixels wide. Now, when you create a new catalog, it will be set to the monitor size previews by default. If you're using an existing catalog, from the Edit or Lightroom menu, select Catalog Settings. And then under the File Handling menu here, you'll see the standard preview size. Select Auto. So now it's going to generate a preview that matches my monitor size. And this is going to be especially useful for those of us with huge monitors like 4K or 5K monitors. So I'll click Close to save that. The new Activity Center, which we showed you a little bit before, that's this thing up here that shows you what your computer is currently doing. So if I were to export some pictures, just export those real quickly. And now I can click this and actually see a list of the different things that are going on. You might have 5 things stacked up here. You can click the X to stop it, or in the case of address lookup and face detection and syncing with Lightroom, you can actually pause them and resume them later. This could be so much better. I wish you could drag different tasks to prioritize them or pause tasks instead of simply canceling them. But it is nice that we can now see them a little bit easier than we could before. You can now move adjustment brushes that you apply. So let's continue working with this particular picture. And I'm going to just add an adjustment brush here, just pretending that I wanted to raise the exposure of the sky a whole bunch, just for the effect. That's not great. But jumping into the grid view, I'll now copy that, hit Control-Shift-C, and I'll copy it. You can see that local adjustments are selected here. So now when I go in and I paste it, this is the same picture, just at a different exposure. I'll hit Control-Shift-V to paste that adjustment brush in there. Raise the exposure so we can see it. But what happens when you paste an adjustment brush onto multiple pictures is you might reframe your picture a little bit, and then all your adjustments are in the wrong spot before you couldn't move them. So now if I go in and I click the adjustment brush here, I can grab this with my cursor and actually move the whole adjustment brush someplace else. Let's try that again. Okay, there we go. So now you can actually move it around. You couldn't do that before. That's all there is to it. Lightroom can also now cure pet eye, and I don't happen to have any pictures of pet eye. Pet eye is the red eye that you get on your pets. It's often like blue or green depending on the type of animal, but dogs and cats have bigger pupils than we do. They just are able to see at night better. And so when you take a picture with flash or even without flash, the light will bounce back at your camera and look really weird. Lightroom has for a long time had this red eye correction tool that allows you to just select somebody's eyes and fix it. There's not an eye there. Anyway, now there's this pet eye selection here, which after you apply it to an eye, you can adjust the pupil size to correct it and even add a more natural looking catch light by leaving that checkbox selected. Curing pet eye. You can now filter collections too, and if you're like me on my main computer, I must have 200 collections. That becomes a challenge because I need to go in and sometimes find a collection. So collections are great organizational tools, but when you have too many of them, it gets to be really difficult. So let's go into the collections here. Now you can just type a word here and it will filter the collections by those that match it. So I can find just my Chelsea collection quite quickly. You can now search on flags and ratings by using the metadata filter in the library view. So we'll switch back to the grid view here. I need to go back to all photographs. And as I select metadata here, you see the standard metadata. But now I can change these to be flags and ratings. Those didn't exist before. I don't know why you'd want to do that, because you also have the attributes here that allow you to search by flags or ratings, but they're redundantly available under metadata now, so that's there. You can now auto level pictures when you crop them. Switching back to Lightroom, let's open up a picture of this guy, go into the develop module, and as I crop it, there's this auto button here. So now I can click that and it will look at the picture and try to straighten it, and you can see it could not straighten the photo automatically. That happens a lot. So let's just try a different photo. Maybe we can straighten. No, it couldn't do that. Let's see if I can find a photo that is noticeably off level. Okay, this one looks a little tilty. Let's see what happens when we try to crop it. Auto. There we go. It didn't actually make it any straighter, I don't think. Maybe it did. Anyway, you can now click that auto button and Lightroom will take a guess and try to make the picture straighter. Sometimes it's dead on. Sometimes it does nothing, and sometimes it's completely wrong. But that's what you get when you make automatic adjustments. Sometimes it can be a time saver. Another option is to hit Control-Tab to cycle through the different upright adjustments. So Let's cancel that. And as we go down to the lens corrections here in the basic tab, you can see there are different upright corrections that will kind of fix perspective distortion, especially happens when you're looking at a nice straight building and you're pointed up at it with a wide angle lens. You'll see it leaning back like that, like it is in this original picture. So you could always go down to lens corrections and click all these different things. Another way to do that now, just a keyboard shortcut, is hold down the control key and hit the tab key multiple times, and it will cycle through them all. So if you have a picture like this where you see noticeable perspective correction, it just saves you a little bit of time. Just hit control tab until the picture looks better. And then when you're happy with it, that one's probably the most accurate one. You can just leave it and possibly even crop it down. I'll select the constrain to image checkbox there to just crop out the white parts of the picture. HTML5 web galleries. The web module is the worst part of Lightroom, most definitely. It's this very outdated method for creating websites containing your pictures. So if you're not sure what I mean by outdated, this is what the web pages look like. Especially in the past, they had little small grids and you could kind of click these little text links to move back and forth, or hit previous and next. And when you clicked them, they looked kind of appalling like that. So we'll go back to the index, and in the past you had these classic gallery templates. They're now called classic gallery templates. And those are all terrible. But Adobe has seen fit to give us some newer templates. So if you are going to try to make a web gallery, you can now select from these more modern templates that fill the screen better and also work with mobile devices. So I say they're HTML5 because that's just the latest version of HTML, and HTML is the kind of secret code that makes web pages possible. So they've upgraded it to the latest version and made everything look a little bit prettier too. All you need to know is if you do decide to use the web module, which I don't recommend, use the grid, square, or track templates only, and everything will work out much better for you. The pictures are bigger, everything looks better, and they work better on mobile devices too. You can now use larger fonts in Lightroom. I'll show you the effect of that. This is another change that they're making for people with big monitors, because there are a lot of people who are getting Retina displays or 4 and 5K monitors. So if I can open up the menu here, I'm going to go to the Preferences dialog, either under Edit on a PC or Lightroom on a Mac. And then on the Interface tab here for font size, I'm going to select largest. Before, it only went up to 200%. Now it goes up to 250%. And as I click OK, nothing's going to happen until I restart Lightroom. So I'll close Lightroom and then restart it. And when I'm done here, you're going to see huge fonts that look ridiculous on my screen. That's okay, because it's not intended for a 1080p display like this. It's intended for an extremely high resolution screen. So what we see now are massive, massive fonts that take up the entire screen and look super silly. But if I had a Retina display, suddenly the text would be readable. Because I don't know if you've used one of these displays with the standard font size, but the text will be so small, you literally can't tell what you're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and switch that back so I can see what I'm doing a little bit better, since I don't actually need it. This is a minor tweak that they've hidden in the preferences, but now Lightroom can ignore when you accidentally click on one of those badges over thumbnails in the grid view. Let's fire Lightroom back up. These are badges right here, and you can see this particular picture has 2 badges. One that indicates that the photo is keywords, and another that there have been development adjustments to it. Well, as an option, you can turn on showing badges on the film strip down here, and you might accidentally click them and, for example, jump into the development view when you don't want that to happen. You can turn that off. Go to the Edit menu or the Lightroom menu, and then select Preferences. And now there's this checkbox here, Ignore Clicks on Badges. Notice it applies only to the film strip view. You can't control what it does with clicks in the grid view. So now, when I double click that, well, it opened up the picture, but it didn't jump into the Develop module like it did before. A really minor tweak. When you export pictures, you can now resize them by a specific percentage. So before you could tell Lightroom that you wanted it to be, the exported picture to be 1,000 pixels wide, or restrict the dimensions in some other way. Now you can also resize it to by a specific percentage. So Come on. If I select resize to fit here, I can now select percentage and set it to be 50%, for example. So you can now export relative to the current picture size. Adobe also improved the touch interface for Lightroom, and if you've used Lightroom Mobile on your smartphone or tablet, you'll find it very familiar. Basically, if you have a touch screen like a Microsoft Surface or a monitor like this, you can press this touch interface button in the lower left corner here with the little finger. You have to have the film strip up here open. Now with this open, you can more easily edit the photo with your fingers. So this first icon here brings up the film strip and allows you to switch between pictures. You can also switch between pictures by just swiping with your finger to move from one picture to the next. You can make adjustments by clicking this adjustment icon here. So for example, I could adjust the color temperature by touching that and then dragging the slider to the side a little bit. Yeah, let's warm it up just a little bit. All the options that you're familiar with are here. I think the contrast is a little much, so I'll just drag the contrast down a little bit. Let's see, yeah, do it this way. Let's recover some of those highlights in this picture. So everything you're familiar with is here. This third icon here brings up different presets that just an easy way to quickly make big changes. These are going to be the exact same presets that you normally use with your standard user interface. Click the last button here and you can do some quick cropping on it. Go ahead and tighten this up. You can see they have different ratios down here, just like in the standard crop tool. If you want to undo a change, click the undo icon here in the lower left. As you can see, once you undo something, you have the ability to redo it. In the upper right corner there, you have an option to share it, create a virtual copy, add it to a quick collection, or edit it out in Photoshop. Just calls it out to the different tools that are also available to you. That about sums it up. There are lots of new little tweaks in Lightroom 6 that make it a much more usable and fun application. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to send me an email at tony@northrup.org. And don't forget to dig into the book, makes quick reference, and helps you understand each of these features in more detail. We have all of these covered throughout the book. Thanks so much.